I've had tinnitus since 2012. And, I've certainly had the same kind of bumps in the road and difficulties that people experience, including insomnia was one of the worst problems that I dealt with for a while there. So I'm well familiar with the challenges that we all face because of it.
Hey everybody, this is Michael Piskosz from MindEar, and you're listening to the Tinnitus Unplugged podcast, the show that answers all your tinnitus questions and helps guide you through your tinnitus journey. Tune in regularly to listen to a variety of world-renowned tinnitus experts share valuable tinnitus management tips and information to help you manage your tinnitus. To learn more, visit us at www.mindear.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Tinnitus Unplugged, a podcast by MindEar. I'm very excited today to introduce our guest, Dr. Perreau. Anne has worked with the tinnitus community for many, many years and has a lot of good, valuable information that she's going to share with us today. So on that note, Dr. Perreau, please introduce yourself to our audience and let them know a little bit about you.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. Yes, again, Anne Perreau here. I am just so excited to be part of this podcast. I am an associate professor in the Communication Sciences and Disorders Department at Augustana College, which is a small college in the Midwest along the Mississippi River. In addition to being a professor, I'm also an audiologist. I'm the clinic coordinator for Audiology Clinic. I see patients weekly. And in addition to that, I work closely with Dr. Tyler, University of Iowa. And so I do a lot of research in tinnitus and hyperacusis as well.
Wonderful. For our audience, for those of you not familiar with Dr. Richard Tyler, one of the key opinion leaders in the tinnitus field for decades, and has done a lot of wonderful research, as well as held a number of conferences at the University of Iowa to educate both audiologists and people suffering from tinnitus as well. So that's great. I appreciate you sharing a little bit of background about yourself. And for our listeners, you obviously work with tinnitus patients on a regular basis. What are some of the first steps when you're working with your patients that you want to educate them on as they begin their tinnitus journey?
Yeah. Again, thank you for that, Michael. So, certainly in my clinic, I see tinnitus patients weekly. And when I'm working with a patient, I first start with basically just an hour-long consultation, really getting to know the patient. I get a lot of information from them from questionnaires that I've worked with Dr. Tyler to develop over the years. But really, when I'm working one-on-one with the patient, it is just so important to understand what are the specific problems that they're dealing with from their tinnitus, creating a tinnitus plan, a management plan that will help them. And then I'm just working through to say, okay, and what are your goals, their goals for treatment, for management? And those things, of course, vary from individual to individual with tinnitus.
Okay.
So it's really important. The first visit, I'm doing a lot of note taking and listening, but I appreciate that role that I have, which is really to guide my patients. Before we move on, I should just say that I have tinnitus myself. I've had tinnitus since 2012. And, I've certainly had the same kind of bumps in the road and difficulties that people experience, including insomnia was one of the worst problems that I dealt with for a while there. So I'm well familiar with the challenges that we all face because of it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that personal experience with us, and we'll
Mhm.
probably touch upon that throughout the next 20, 30 minutes or so as we talk through this. Um, I think that's a really important point that you talk about, how each person is unique in how they experience tinnitus, right? And that's why that initial consultation is so important. What are some of the benefits aside from just gathering information? Is it also being able to give people a platform to talk about this? Because, for those of us who work in the industry, we know that there's not a lot of places people can turn
Yep.
when that they're struggling with tinnitus. So those consultations, aside from the clinical information and the medical information,
Mhm.
would you agree that it oftentimes is the first time somebody actually gets to talk to somebody about their tinnitus?
Yes, and certainly, we don't want that to be the case,
Right.
that the first time they'd come to maybe my clinic, that would be a tinnitus specialty clinic. We don't want that to be the first encounter, but let's just say it does happen. I do think a lot of patients coming in today, there's a lot of information online, and more people are learning about tinnitus and what can be done. But certainly, there's just a lot of questions. And I'll just say there's a lot of misconceptions of what tinnitus is. And I talk about with my patients what tinnitus is not. It does not make us deaf. It does not, mean that we are going crazy, right? And that we have a mental illness. There are ways that we can learn to cope with these things. And that's part of it is really education. So I'll
Yeah.
just say, being a professor, I work with my students to educate them in hearing science and audiology, teaching them, how they're going to, and preparing them to work with patients someday.
Hmm.
And I think that that same line of thinking that I take to educating my students, I do the same thing with my patients. And I really, again, start with where are you? What can I do to help understanding their situation? And then saying, okay, how can I educate and provide more guidance here in a place that they might not know the next steps, like you said? So a lot of it is education. At my clinic, not only am I doing that one-on-one with patients in person, I'm also doing that through group sessions. I just had one a week ago, and typically it depends between 4 to 8 patients and their spouses or partners can come. I have students that observe those sessions. Again, the whole point of those is to provide education and really understand, how counseling can help tinnitus, but also just sound therapy, how sound, not sitting in a quiet room when our tinnitus is bad that particular day. So, and then knowing what treatments are effective and backed by research evidence, and then which ones perhaps would not be. Again, that's part of the discussion and working with my patients.
Yeah, I think you touch upon a really important point there, that there's just a plethora of information online these days about tinnitus. However, it's important, and that's what we hope to do with this podcast, is to help people navigate truthful and credible information versus some of the gimmicks that are out there. So it sounds like, your whether it be a one-on-one or a group meeting, that's a great place for people, a great resource for people to take advantage of. The group meetings and some of the approaches that you take, I know I'm familiar with, one of the protocols you use called tinnitus activities treatment, also known as TAT. Um, are those group sessions a part of that model, or is that something unique
Yeah.
to what you do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And certainly, tinnitus activities treatment is a management approach for tinnitus. Again, this was started by Dr. Tyler in the 1980s. It includes the counseling components, and we work to address the 4 main areas that we know are that most patients have kind of, how their tinnitus is impacting them. So, thoughts and emotions, maybe hearing communication. Sometimes it affects our ability to concentrate. And then lastly, sleep, which I mentioned myself. So those 4 areas we work to address with tinnitus activities treatment. We have modules and there's homework. And again, I have materials. It's all mostly picture-based materials so we can work through the counseling together. But of course, it's tailored towards the individual patient. Again, really learning what each person needs. And then I use that TAT approach to adapt it. So those are the individual sessions. With the group counseling, what I have done with Dr. Tyler, we have a whole set of slides available out there for audiologists who are providing treatment. And again, that is really talking more about hearing, hearing loss, and tinnitus, going through basic, again, causes and mechanisms of these things. And then we talk more about the treatments. What treatments have you all tried? Which ones have actually been successful? Now, my point of is to always say, now, which ones do we have research evidence that support their use? And then we talk about those things and what can that look like to implement those types of, again, research-backed treatments. So again, yes, the group counseling is very much a part of TAT. I try to always start my patients with group counseling. And that way we get kind of everyone on the same page about what tinnitus is, how we can improve it, and what can we do. And then if needed, there's individual counseling, which again is part of the TAT model.
That's great. Let's take a moment to just dissect each one of those 4 stages. So for our listeners and viewers who may not be familiar with some of those stages, why each stage is important. I think the first one you mentioned was thoughts and emotions. Can you elaborate a little bit on why that's an important step?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very important that we talk about thoughts and emotions when we're discussing tinnitus and its impact on our lives, right? And the difficulty here is that when we're thinking about tinnitus, and at first, maybe just first experiencing it, it is really scary. We talk about it being unexpected. It's important because our body is telling us so. We really don't know how to deal with it.
Many
And
people
so,
don't have a reference point.
exactly. And just like any other health scare, you're saying, what is this? And how am I going to, and I don't like this, right? I
Lots
don't
of
like this.
questions.
Yes. So what we do is really unpack that thought, right? What are the thoughts that we have about our tinnitus? What are the feelings that come from those thoughts? What are our reactions to, again, the thoughts that we have about our tinnitus? And I really work with my patients to say, if those thoughts are negative, that means that our emotional reaction will also be negative.
Mhm.
And so, what we do is try to reframe those thoughts to be healthy thoughts about tinnitus. They don't necessarily need to be positive, like, I love my tinnitus. That would not be realistic. But we could say, I'm going to allow the sound to be here. And one of the excerpts I oftentimes read to my patients is one that says, well, we should think of our tinnitus being something from nature. Because typically, if it's a nature sound, we accept that. If it's the sound of the ocean or the rain, we're used to that. We like those sounds for the most part. So, this is something we try to say, okay, maybe we can accept that sound, have those thoughts and emotions be a little bit more neutral, less negative reaction, and that can really help again in allowing us to cope with our tinnitus. Again, it is not a process that happens, of course, overnight. These are many sessions and talking with, each other. And also using sometimes tools like a diary, which I will teach my patients to do. Let's write down the thoughts that we have and the emotional reaction that follows. And maybe we can work to, again, reframe those into more helpful ways of thinking.
Wonderful, wonderful. And what would be the next stage in tinnitus activities
Sure.
treatment there?
Great. Yeah. So often thoughts and emotions is where we begin because it is such a place that, again, most of us don't think very positively about it. Right. So then the next would be, well, it depends actually. That almost is always what I do, but depending on what my patient's needs are, it may be hearing and communication, especially if someone has hearing loss.
Mhm.
I almost always see if there's hearing loss and tinnitus, which is the majority of people with tinnitus also have hearing loss. Then we'd say, okay, let's try and look at ways that we could improve hearing and communication. Maybe that's with the device, but it doesn't need to be. There are other ways to improve communication. We talk about strategies, communication strategies. Sometimes it's just go get your hearing tested and make sure we know that
Yeah,
impact,
yeah.
right? That's a very important thing to have done, especially when someone's, well, either just beginning to have their tinnitus or has it for a long time. Again, hearing test is really important.
Yeah.
Beyond hearing communication, concentration is an area I see a lot of patients. It seems like right now, how it affects our focus and ability to do work, right, is really influenced. So I do talk about ways that we could structure our day to allow tinnitus, like think about the activities you're doing and when is tinnitus more likely to be influencing you negatively and like distracting, I guess.
Mhm.
What could we do in our day that would be more helpful, beneficial with the activities that you're undertaking? And then in addition to that, I do teach my patients attention diversion exercises, ways that we can really be focusing on and taking voluntary control, volitional control of our brain, right? And the idea that we can control what we actively think about. We have that capability, and if it's monitoring tinnitus, Well, what is the old adage? The more you think of your tinnitus, the more you think of your tinnitus.
Right.
So we really have to work to, avoid that. And so the attention control exercises that we teach, these stem from chronic pain. Patients use them often. And so that can be really helpful to say, no, this is an area that you can control how you're thinking about your tinnitus and how much time you're paying to your tinnitus. It's
Yeah.
just a really easy thing to be because it is so bothersome.
Yeah, I've often used the analogy to your attention diversion strategies of tinnitus is like an itch in the brain. The
Yeah.
more you scratch it, the more it itches, right?
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is mitigate that itch.
Exactly.
I think you brought up some really important points for our listeners there. If you are somebody, even if you're not struggling with tinnitus, it's always a good idea to get a baseline hearing test.
Yeah.
But for those of you who are struggling with tinnitus, if you have not seen
Yeah.
a hearing healthcare professional, such as an
Yeah.
audiologist, a great first step is to go visit a hearing healthcare professional to get that baseline audiogram for a variety of reasons, right? Just to make sure there's no underlying conditions.
Yes.
Are there hearing problems and things like that? On that note, you talked about potentially using a device in some cases, which could, for some people, be a hearing aid.
Yeah.
Um, do you find that it might go both ways in the sense that tinnitus can, as you said, impair concentration and focus, thus make it more difficult to communicate.
Mhm.
So it can get in the way of trying to communicate efficiently. But at the same time, for some individuals who wear a hearing aid, that can
Mhm.
also help with the tinnitus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is actually one thing we talked a lot about at the last group session. I had several patients that wanted that just had a lot of questions about how does a hearing aid help with tinnitus?
Hmm.
And my response to that question when the spouse asked that was, well, there's a lot of ways that a hearing aid can help. It is not the only solution for helping tinnitus when you have hearing loss, but it is a good one. And it's a good place to start, which most audiologists will begin with. The reason why is that when you have the amplification from wearing a hearing aid, it's going to pick up the sounds around you. And in doing that, and you'll be able to hear those sounds better, right? So it might just be, footsteps, or maybe my computer is, the fan is on, whatever, right? Could be, the refrigerator in the back or some, whatever background sound it is, even in a quiet space, that can be enough to mask your tinnitus. And then it's not near as noticeable. One of the things that we recommend is to use sound therapy. That's part of this tinnitus activities treatment I did not touch on, but very much that we use sound therapy, meaning sound. You just put in sound at any moment and certainly when tinnitus is bothersome, but just even in times when you're in quiet. Some of my patients use sound all the time, but most of us say only when we need it, when it's quiet.
Hmm.
But we put in a little low level noise, and that's what I teach my patients to do. It doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be enough sound. And in doing that, that will help you to be distracted. And I also go through this kind of description of how it actually influences our brain's detection of tinnitus as well using sound. Again, a hearing aid can do the same thing because now you're hearing better. So you hear the environmental noise better. And that helps you, and conversation and speech, other people talking in the background, as well as a conversation you're trying to have. And in doing that, that will mask your tinnitus. And for so many people, it is just not near as noticeable.
Yeah.
Now, granted, there are some, and we've done some research to know there are some people whom their tinnitus is made worse from amplification, either from a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, but it is it's few, right? Less than 5 to 10%. So most of the time we say a hearing aid is beneficial,
Hmm.
and that's why we would want to evaluate with a hearing test, and then if a hearing aid is appropriate, go ahead and get hearing aids in both ears. I even say maybe don't get as much of the high features, but work to get the tinnitus and the hearing aids in both ears.
Hmm.
If that finances are a concern, it's better to have good, masking of tinnitus, so that we can deal with that as well as the hearing loss.
Yeah, that's great advice. And for our listeners, it's important to note that hearing aids aren't the only way to
Yeah,
incorporate sound therapy,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
You could simply have a set of wireless earbuds or
yes.
headphones,
Yeah.
and stream your favorite songs using Spotify or Pandora or Amazon Music.
Yeah.
The key to your point, and is to find something that helps soothe and relax you, and that you can listen for an extended period of
Yeah.
time in the
Exactly.
background. It's oftentimes why some people like to listen to colored noise, right? Like a
Mhm.
white noise
Yeah.
or a pink noise, or to your point earlier, nature sounds
Yeah.
are very popular
Yeah.
to use as sound therapy as well. You mentioned the last stage about being about insomnia or
Uh-huh.
sleep
Yes.
quality, sleep disturbances.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
can you touch a little bit upon that? I
Yeah.
imagine a lot of the things you previously talked about thoughts and
Mhm.
emotions, sound
Mm.
therapy, and things
Yep.
have a role in helping
Yeah.
sleep quality.
Isn't that true? And sleep is just such an important part of us being able to cope as humans, right? We need our rest.
Yep.
And so one of the things I think about that sleep module in TAT, really what we're doing, we talk about the sleep cycles, the average sleep being about 8 hours for most adults, but these awakenings happen more frequently as we get older, and that can be really disruptive. And not that tinnitus wakes us up, but once you're awake, you're sitting in a quiet space, typically in the bedroom,
Yeah.
and then it's very hard to get back to
And
sleep.
it's dark, so
So,
there's not a lot of
and it's
visual
dark.
contrast
That's
as
right.
well,
There's
right?
that is so your tinnitus is the only thing in the room. But the good thing, again, we talk about is there are many ways that you can make your environment more comfortable. We talk about the temperature in the room, the lighting, but then also sound.
Mhm.
And so not only I held up my phone when you were giving examples, but smartphone apps are super helpful.
Mhm.
And we've had done some research just so show that they help a variety of different situations. Some of my patients will loop sounds like on YouTube, on a tablet. Others like to use a sound generator or just a fan. And the sound pillow is another great solution when you have a sleeping partner that might be bothered. There's just some many different options for putting sound in the bedroom so that when you do wake up, it is not going to be, oh, there's my tinnitus and I can't get back to sleep. So again, we go through that. I should end just by saying relaxation exercises are just really, really important. And these same smartphone apps that can play sound also can walk you through, visual imagery or deep breathing,
Mm.
body scanning, meditation apps, in fact. And those are things that I also work with my patients on. I give flyers and resources to them. Not only have I studied the use of a smartphone app for tinnitus relief, but I also make sure to provide these resources. And I think that those, again, when we use all these tools together, that can be where you actually see a difference and can be really helpful.
So it really is a comprehensive, holistic approach. As you mentioned, the relaxation exercises are great for helping people manage stress and anxiety that are oftentimes significant factors with tinnitus. Um, are there any tools and resources? I know you guys,
Yeah.
are there any websites that you recommend? We've talked in previous podcasts about the American Tinnitus Association, which
Okay.
is at ata.org, which is usually a good first step for individuals. Are there any other resources like that you recommend for people to check out to find out
Yeah.
more?
Oh, that's really great. Again, I would definitely be one to recommend ata.org. I actually print out the patient navigator. I love that flyer. It's available on their website. And so when patients ask me, where's a reputable online source for tinnitus, I would say go to ata.org. That will be where you can find that information, credible source. In addition to that, gosh, I would certainly always talk about our Iowa Tinnitus and Hyperacusis Conference. We hold this annually it's been in August the last couple of years. And it is available in person and we've done Zoom. So it's a hybrid option now for conference attendance. So that can be great. And as you mentioned already, we do invite patients, people with tinnitus, do attend the conference. And there is even space for talking about how we deal with tinnitus in addition to hearing from clinicians, researchers, and also people in industry. It's a very comprehensive conference. So when I have patients that I'm working with, I will always give them a flyer and say, you should come. Whenever it is, come to the next one. So I would say that. The other that I think we need to talk about are support groups for tinnitus. There's many great support groups. I know Deb Holman out of Madison, Wisconsin, who operates the tinnitus support group there. I've been a guest speaker. I've also been a guest speaker for the St. Louis support group. So again, being in the Midwest, that's where I find myself being invited. But these are held on Zoom. So, but other tinnitus support groups are done in person or Zoom. Again, ata.org has a list of support groups that you could look out, and I recommend those to my patients often. So I guess in terms of online resources, those are probably what I would recommend for my patients. Yeah.
No, that's great. And for individuals who might be interested in the University of Iowa conference, could they Google University of Iowa Tinnitus Conference, and that will kind of take them in the right direction?
Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful. So that's an easy search that our listeners can look for if that's something that's of interest to them. And you had said that's typically in August, so it would have just passed a few months ago this year, right? So wonderful. Are there other kind of easy things that, a lot of people can't just run out and necessarily get hearing aids tomorrow? Some people might not have wireless earbuds and things like that they can stream with. Maybe some individuals. What could you recommend that people could use? Just say what might be in their house, like turning on the TV or opening up a window to let a lot of those nature sounds in. What are some of the things you could recommend that most people will have access to that they could literally start using right after they listen to this podcast?
Okay, that's great. Yes, it's important. We need to have things right away that you can start doing. Your examples were sound-based, Michael, which is great. So the first things I would think about, I would actually go to a smartphone app because almost all of the people that come to my clinic have a smartphone, regardless of income. So I would actually download a smartphone app for tinnitus relief. There are many. Most hearing aid manufacturers have one, but let's just give a couple of examples. Resound Relief is by far my favorite. That particular, again, it's Resound Relief. That app builds in where you can play, multiple different sounds at once. And it provides a way for you to edit the sounds. There's music, kind of more relaxation. That's true. White noise, static noise, plus the, highway or traffic noise. Some of the favorites from our study I remember was heavy rain, ocean waves, but there's crickets. There's a few people that like those typically.
Depending on
depending on your tinnitus and how, exactly. And I always tell my patients, it's not about one sound being best for everyone. We know it's more about you selecting the right sound for you. Because what I like for my tinnitus is not going to be the same as the next person's tinnitus sound, because again, our tinnitus is different. So we need to remember that it's just you selecting, do a sound search. And I would start with a smartphone app. If you wanted, you could go down the routes, as you said, TV or other sounds. But typically, in my experience, a smartphone app is quite helpful. So I would probably go there. In addition to, sound, for me, the next thing would be journaling or maybe just tracking. If you don't want to journal, not everyone likes to journal, and I get that. But you need to probably think about your headspace. We think about the sound environment with the smartphone app or whatever tool you decide to use. And then you need to think about your headspace with respect to your tinnitus. What are you thinking about your tinnitus? How are you thinking about it? And if you can put it in the negative category in any way, I don't like this noise, I wish it'd go away, how am I going to live with this? Those are all pretty negative thoughts. We would start to say, write them down, and then try to think of more, like I would say, healthier ways to think about tinnitus. What could be a more neutral thought? I don't like this noise, but I can learn to live with it. That is neutral. So I would say, in addition to sound, think about headspace. And then beyond that, I would be one that tends to say, because I hear this a lot from my patients, I don't know what else to do because I may be newly retired or I'm kind of settling in and here's this tinnitus. Alternate activities is really important. Have other things that you can do. So when your tinnitus is bothersome, you can get up and go do whatever, right? So beyond
Physical
just,
exercise, a
yes,
hobby, something
yes.
engaging.
One of my patients, he has tinnitus hyperacusis. He's doing art therapy. So he basically paints
Wonderful.
for 2 hours a day. I mean, it's really whatever works, but you want to find things that you can do to take your mind off your tinnitus. You use the other tools, play some music in the background, whatever, so that you're doing something. And then make sure you build these activities throughout your day, knowing that tinnitus may want to distract you, but you're going to find, okay, maybe now I'm a little tired. I guess I need to switch and do something different. And this is really important. So those would be my first thoughts, is things you could do even tomorrow to help your tinnitus would be
Yeah.
those.
Those are great suggestions and very accessible
Mhm.
for just about everybody. As we wrap it up here, um, you know, when I asked this question about what the future of tinnitus management might hold, of course, everybody would love to find a cure, right? That would be
Yeah.
the kind of the one size fits all solution for everybody. But we're still a ways away from that. Just to let our listeners know, a lot of research is being looked into to better understand the mechanisms and the causes of tinnitus. So hopefully one day in the not too distant future, we'll get to a cure. But as of right now, that doesn't exist. Putting a cure aside, where do you see and where do you hope the future of tinnitus management will go over the coming years?
Oh, I really appreciate that question. So one of the places I'm looking to, let's say, help in all of this, right, tinnitus journey, we've worked to develop a tinnitus activities treatment online study. So this is basically taking our approach of what we've described here in the podcast, in-person therapy, and actually moving it to a remote counseling format or program, so that as someone with tinnitus, you could go to a website and sign up for this program. It's 6 weeks, and that you would be able to watch these videos, instructional videos with myself and Dr. Tyler. We'd have the homework, things like the tinnitus diary we talked about. And with going through these activities, you would learn more about tinnitus. You would develop strategies that are effective, things that we have seen in our clinics to be effective, and be able to use them again right away. And so we developed TAT online during, well, actually just the last couple of years. And a year ago in 2022 is when we worked to do a preliminary study of the effectiveness of the program. And we found a good reduction in tinnitus severity from people working through this program. And when I say that, I'm not giving any numbers, but it was like 40% saw a significant reduction
Sure.
in their tinnitus severity, which was very positive. And 9 out of 10 would say that they would recommend the program for others with tinnitus. So that was good. So we worked to modify the program. And just this fall, you may have seen ata.org. We were in their newsletter, recruited new participants, and we had an overwhelming response of over 250
Wow.
people from
Nice.
ata.org, and then also in my local Quad Cities community. We had another 50. So it's just been, let me just say, that's probably one of the most eye-opening things to me, is the idea that people want to, they want to find ways to help their tinnitus. They may want a cure, but I'm getting responses and feedback from people who are working through this program saying, these videos are helpful. I just had one this morning. They're just really, he used the word enlightening. So
Uh-huh.
again, the point is, I think the future of tinnitus management is for us to really deliver tools that work for people, that you can get help. You can maybe do that at your home. And then if that's not enough, you can go see a professional like me for in-person therapy. But my goal with TAT Online is to provide everyone with the ability to learn to cope with their tinnitus. And then from there, they would be able to, if they need additional support, they can get that. And so, but beyond where we don't have any more misconceptions or what is it, just be able to deliver a very sound program that everyone could start with. That's been my goal. I think eventually, we're working through as researchers, you should know this. We talk about this in the Tinnitus conference in August. What are we doing to help with, developing not a cure, but the idea that we would work to treat tinnitus and maybe find specific interventions depending on the tinnitus that you have
Mhm.
or the way, your own situation and working through mechanisms and understanding subgroups of tinnitus patients.
Yeah.
And we're looking to do that. It is an,
And that allows us to customize the
yes,
treatment plan specific to the
exactly.
person's needs, of course.
You've got it.
Yep.
So we're looking to see how that will emerge. There's a lot of great research. And when I leave that conference every August, again, just, a little over 2 months from since then, it is really encouraging. We do
Yeah.
see how these things are moving forward. And I think we should be hopeful that there will be more treatments, things backed with more evidence, and we'll have that. And we'll also have professionals that know how to guide patients. That's also been a problem here,
Yeah.
is that sometimes we go to the doctor and they say there's nothing to be done. Well, that's not quite true. It may mean that there's nothing medically wrong with you with your tinnitus, but there are things that you can do to help it. And I
Yeah.
hope that that message can be heard from everyone.
I think that's great. And I think we provided a lot of wonderful resources and tips that our listeners can take with them.
Yeah.
I want to thank you, Dr. Ann Perreau, for your time today and sharing your experiences with us. We hope to have you again in the near future to share more of your tinnitus expertise.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.